WADR. Promoting dialogue.
It's 6 p.m. in Dakar and 7 p.m. in Lagos. Good evening and welcome to Newslink, coming to you live from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world at wadr.org. First, our top stories. Malian government firmly opposes dialogue with terrorist groups.
I must
clarify that the government is not considering any dialogue with armed terrorist groups. Lawless actors will bear responsibility.
Nigerian Senate reverses leadership restriction order.
If he has the experience to be elected as Senate president after just 4 years, and he will tell you he's presiding well, and we have also said he's presiding well.
Senegal sees liquefied natural gas exports decline, and WHO confirms no dedicated medicine or cure for hantavirus. Please stay tuned for the details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Veronique Joy.
Thank you for joining us. Let's begin in Mali, as the country's foreign minister, Abdoulaye Diop, has firmly ruled out any negotiation with armed terrorist groups while reaffirming the openness of the transitional authorities to exchanges only within the Republican framework. During a meeting held in Kululuba with the accredited Diplomatic Corps, the Malian Minister of Foreign Affairs drew a clear distinction between political dialogue and compromise with terrorist groups in a context marked by the attacks of April 25th, which caused heavy losses, including the death of Defense Minister Sadio Kamara. Augustine Coley tells us more.
Abdoulaye Diop was categorical in his responses, accusing them of being responsible for the recurring violence suffered by the Malian population for several years. This position is aimed in particular at the Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims, JANIM, affiliated with Al-Qaeda and listed on the UN Security Sanctions List since October 2018 in accordance with Resolution 2368. The minister also pointed finger at the Azawad Liberation Front, arguing that its alliance with JANIM amounts to a deliberate choice to support a terrorist organization recognized as such by the United Nations, which effectively excludes aid from any dialogue.
I must clarify that the government is not considering any dialogue with armed terrorist groups. Lawless actors will bear responsibility for the tragic events of our populations have endured for years. If we lie down, we are finished. Mali will not lie down. Mali will not back down in its determination to eradicate terrorism from our territory and from the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, with the support of Burkina Faso, Niger and other partners, notably the Russia, whose actions alongside us I wish to commend.
Despite this firm stance, the Malian authorities remain open to political dialogue with actors operating within an institutional framework. The minister reaffirmed Mali's determination to pursue the objective of eradicating terrorism on its territory, as well as in the area of the Confederation of the Alliance of Sahel States in cooperation with Burkina Faso, Niger, and the Russian Federation.
That was Augustine Coley with that report. We cross over to Nigeria, where no fewer than 13 people have been killed in a fresh attack by suspected gunmen in Zabarzongo community of Plateau State. The incident, which occurred early hours of Friday, threw the community into panic, leaving several residents with varying degrees of injuries. According to residents, the attackers invaded the community at about midnight, opening fire indiscriminately before attacking residents with machetes and other dangerous weapons. The report stated that the assailants moved from house to house, targeting innocent residents and leaving a trail of death and destruction. Confirming the incident, Secretary General of the Igwe Development Association, Mr. Danjuma Ota, described the attack as barbaric, tragic and condemnable. He called on security agencies to strengthen surveillance and provide adequate protection for vulnerable communities. Meanwhile, Nigeria's Senate has reversed a controversial amendment of its standing order, a move that reopens the political space for leadership contest within the 11th National Assembly and could reshape calculations ahead of the 2027 Senate presidency race. The initial amendment had introduced a requirement that only senators who had taken their oath of office could contest for leadership positions. However, following mounting concerns, the Senate reconsidered its position. WADR's Abuja correspondent Yechenu Sasitu has more details in this report.
The reversal came after a motion was moved by Senate leader Opeyemi Bamidele, who explained that a further review of the amendment exposed potential legal and constitutional issues. Lawmakers reportedly feared that maintaining the clause could create grounds for dispute or even judicial challenges that might undermine the legitimacy of the Senate's leadership process. Adams Oshomole represents the Edo North Senatorial District in the Senate.
If he has the experience to be elected as Senate president after just 4 years, and he will tell you he's presiding well, and we have also said he's presiding well, why does he think that 4 years is no longer enough, that you must do 8 consecutive years? The other one that is extremely provocative is to say that even people who have been in the Senate before, who are even senior to the Senate president in terms of ranking, they don't took them and they left. Either they were voted out, or they contested for executive position, or they were appointed as minister like himself. When they now come back, they are not considered as ranking.
With the decision, the Senate has effectively restored broader eligibility. Abdul Ningi represents Bauchi Central.
The Constitution and the Senate rules allow the Senate to regulate itself. As long as the regulation does not impugn to the Constitution, the Senate is allowed to do that. Therefore, rescinding, bringing emotion, whatever that anybody wants to bring, he can bring, as long as it makes sense, as long as it is not about himself or themselves or about a group that are coming to take over.
Analysts say the developments could significantly influence internal power dynamics within the Nigerian Senate. By removing procedural restrictions, the chamber opens the door for more contenders, intensifying competition for strategic positions and potentially altering alliances ahead of future leadership contests. Overall, the decision underscores ongoing efforts within Nigeria's legislature to balance internal rules with constitutional safeguards while navigating the complex realities of political competition. For WADR, Yechenu Sasetu in Abuja.
The Chadian government has declared a 20-day state of emergency in the violence-hit Lake Chad region on Thursday following a wave of deadly attacks blamed on jihadist group Boko Haram. The decision comes after at least 26 army personnel, including 2 senior generals, were killed in ambushes this week, triggering nationwide mourning and intensified military operations. Government spokesperson Gassim Sharif said authorities reviewed the worsening security and humanitarian situation in the region, citing renewed Boko Haram attacks, civilian displacement, and growing threats to people and property. The latest violence followed a deadly raid on the Barkatolorum military base along Lake Chad, where at least 24 Chadian soldiers were killed and several others wounded, according to military sources.
Au cours de cette séance, le Conseil a examiné la situation sécuritaire et humanitaire.
During this session, the Council reviewed the security and humanitarian situation in the Lake Province, which in recent days has been marked by a resurgence of brutal attacks by the Boko Haram network, population displacement, and persistent threats to people and property. As a result, the Council of Ministers adopted a draft decree proclaiming a state of emergency in the Lake Province for a duration of 21 days. This measure will allow the administrative and military authorities of the Lake Province, under the joint supervision of the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of territorial administration, the Minister of the Armed Forces, Veterans and War Victims, and the Minister of Public Security and Immigration, to take all necessary actions to counter any threats likely to disturb public peace. Before joining the meeting, the President of the Republic and Head of State Marshal Muhammad Idris Deby Itno expressed in his own name and on behalf of the government and the entire Chadian people his condolences to the bereaved families. He also thanked the government of Nigeria for its support and effective coordination in the ongoing response by defense and security forces to track down and neutralize Boko Haram terrorists. He emphasized that it is in difficult times that true friends are recognized.
C'est dans les moments difficiles qu'on reconnaît ses vrais amis, a-t-il souligné.
Bordering Cameroon, Chad, Nigeria and Niger, Lake Chad's remote islands have long served as strongholds for Boko Haram and ISWAP fighters as attacks on regional forces continue to intensify.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Still in Chad, the political climate has taken another turn following the sentencing of several prominent opposition figures linked to the now dissolved Group for Consultation of Political Actors. The group, once a coalition of political actors advocating for democratic reforms and greater political inclusion, has already been disbanded by the country's highest judicial authority, the Supreme Court of Chad. Imo Edit brings us the details.
In a ruling that has sparked debate both within Chad and among international observers, the court handed down 8-year prison sentences to key leaders of the former GCAP. They were convicted on multiple serious charges, including rebellion, illegal possession of weapons of war, participation in an insurrectionary movement, and unlawful assembly. Authorities allege that the group's activities went beyond peaceful political opposition, accusing its leaders of orchestrating actions that threaten national stability. According to the prosecution, evidence presented in court pointed to coordinated efforts to challenge state authority, including links to armed elements, claims the defendants have consistently denied. The defense, however, strongly criticized the verdict, arguing that the charges are politically motivated and part of a broader effort to silence dissent. Lawyers for the accused maintain that the former GCAP leaders were engaged in legitimate political organizing and peaceful protest, not armed rebellion. The case comes at a delicate time for Chad, which has been navigating a complex political transition since the death of former President Idriss Déby in 2021. Civil society groups and some international organizations have expressed concern about the fairness of the trial and the broader implications for political freedoms in the country.
That was Imo Edit with that report. Staying on judicial matters, but in the Gambia, where the Bundung High Court has acquitted and discharged 3 women accused in a female genital mutilation or FGM case linked to the death of a baby girl. Justice Isa Tujani ruled that the prosecution failed to provide sufficient legally admissible evidence after what she described as serious investigative lapses by the police. The first accused, Fatou Kamara, had been charged with the prohibition of female circumcision, an offense that carries a possible life sentence under Gambian law. The 2 others, Umu Sawane and Hawa Conte, were charged as accomplices. However, gender activists have reacted to the ruling. One of these activists is Fatou Balde, a global women's rights advocate and founder of Women in Liberation and Leadership.
I view the verdict as both a disappointment but also as a mark of progress. On one hand, the acquittal underscores how fragile justice becomes when investigations are poorly conducted. Without strong evidence, even the gravest cases collapse, leaving survivors and families without closure. But at the same time, it is important to acknowledge the progress we have made as a country. As we know, in the Gambia, for decades, FGM was treated as a private matter, hidden from scrutiny. Today, FGM is being brought forward in the open, challenged in court, and debated nationally. We need to do better when it comes to dealing and prosecuting cases of gender-based violence. FGM is recognized globally as a form of GBV. In these cases, we must ensure that we strengthen investigations. Police and prosecutors must be trained to collect and preserve evidence that can withstand judicial scrutiny. Ensure we build survivor-centered justice systems where survivors and families are supported throughout the process, ensuring their voices are heard and respected. We must also invest in forensic capacity. Proper medical and forensic expertise is essential to prove harm in court. Furthermore, laws in the country must be backed by consistent enforcement and leadership that puts the protection of girls first. I think it is vital that we engage communities to shift social norms and prevent future cases.
That was Fatou Balde, a global women's rights advocate and founder of Women in Liberation and Leadership in the Gambia. Now, Ghana's Education Minister Haruna Idrisu has called for a thorough review of the country's gold trading arrangements, particularly the controversial Gold for Reserves program operated by the Bank of Ghana, following reports of a significant financial loss. According to emerging figures, the central bank recorded an operational loss of about 15.6 billion Ghana cedis, roughly $1 billion in 2025. The revelation has raised concern among policymakers and economic analysts about the sustainability and transparency of the initiative, which was originally designed to strengthen Ghana's foreign reserves and stabilize the national currency. Haruna Idrisu's call for review signals growing unease within government circles, while urging a reassessment of the program structure, risk management systems, and overall economic impact to ensure it aligns with Ghana's long-term fiscal stability goals.
I think that the Bank of Ghana and the governor and the Minister of Finance deserve some credit. Ignore what you may call the ugly economic noises about losses from the Bank of Ghana. Yes, it comes at a financial cost to the states, but there's no fiscal risk to it yet. You recall that in opposition we're very strong on the fact that the Bank of Ghana must operate independent of the Minister for Finance and even independent of the President. But we should not lose sight of the fact that the Bank of Ghana primary role is just to achieve disinflation. No, disinflation alone is not sufficient. It's not my mandate. But recalling back what we stood for in opposition at the time, I had the rare privilege to lead the minority for 7 years. The Bank of Ghana has a primary responsibility for macroeconomic stability and to stabilize the economy and to provide for buffers when the economy is in distress. So one of the major conflicts the NDC have been working to resolve, which we must communicate very tactfully and carefully, is dealing with the MPP mess and making available for money and expenditure in areas that spares growth.
In Burkina Faso, the transitional government has approved more than 164 billion CFA francs in loans and grants to strengthen agriculture and boost food security nationwide. The financing package was adopted during Thursday's Council of Ministers meeting and includes support from the World Bank, the African Development Fund, and the African Development Bank. The first agreement signed with the International Development Association will fund the operation to support the transformation of agriculture in Burkina Faso. The project received nearly 84 billion CFA francs from the IDA, with the total program estimated at more than 104 billion CFA francs. Deborah Amuwo has more.
Authorities say the 5-year initiative will increase agricultural productivity, improve resilience to climate change, and strengthen the competitiveness of key agricultural sectors. The program includes the development of 3,900 hectares of irrigated farmland and the rehabilitation of 1,800 hectares of lowlands through labor-intensive public works. 2 major storage centers, each capable of holding 400,000 tons, are also planned for Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso. Additionally, the project will finance 800 agricultural sub-projects targeting farmers, returning populations, and former volunteers for the defense of the homeland undergoing socio-economic reintegration. Meanwhile, a second agreement signed with the African Development Fund and the African Development Bank will provide just over 60 billion CFA francs for an emergency agricultural production program. This initiative forms part of the second phase of Burkina Faso's emergency agricultural support project under the Lige Goli program. The funding will support the purchase of nearly 69,000 tons of fertilizer, create a strategic reserve stock, and supply more than 10,000 tons of improved seeds, including rice, maize, soybeans, millet, and wheat. These measures aim to strengthen long-term food security and support the development of Burkina Faso's agricultural sector.
That was Deborah Amoa with that report. You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and online at wadr.org. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Malian government firmly opposes dialogue with terrorist groups. Nigerian Senate reverses leadership restriction order. Senegal sees liquefied natural gas exports decline. Still ahead in the news, WHO confirms no dedicated medicine or cure for hantavirus. We also have the guest interview and sports news. Stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
Thank you for staying with us. Back here in Senegal, the Ministry of Energy, Petroleum and Mines says production from the Sangomar offshore oil field remains stable, while exports of liquefied natural gas project declined slightly due to a one-off maintenance operation. Sankule Janko has more details in this report.
In its monthly report, 3 shipments of crude oil from the Sangomar field were loaded and marketed on the international market during the month of April for a total volume of 2.95 million barrels. The ministry specifies that besides the production plateau is maintained thanks to well optimization and reliability of installations, demonstrating the operational stability of Senegal's first offshore oil project. Regarding the GTA gas project, jointly developed by Senegal and Mauritania, 2 LNG cargoes were exported during the period, representing a total volume of 0.32 million cubic meters. The authorities attribute the observed decrease compared to the previous months to a one-off maintenance stoppage on the site, without providing further details on the duration of the technical intervention. The ministry noted that the publication is part of the transparency policy undertaken by the Senegalese authorities in the hydrocarbons sector, as the country seeks to consolidate the governance of its extractive resources and to strengthen the confidence of international partners and investors. Located off the coast of Senegal, Sangomar is the country's first offshore oil project, while GTA is among the major gas projects currently being developed in West Africa.
That was Sankule Janko with that report. Now, following the outbreak of hantavirus on a cruiser ship on the coast of Cape Verde, the World Health Organization, WHO, said on Friday that the risk to the public of a deadly strain was minimal, as it spreads only through very close contact. WHO Director Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, while giving update on the virus, noted that so far 8 people have now contacted hantavirus linked to a cruise ship, but it is not expected to be an epidemic.
So far, 8 cases have been reported, including 3 deaths. 5 of the 8 cases have been confirmed as hantavirus, and the other 3 are suspected. While this is a serious incident, WHO assesses the public health risk as low. It also shows why the international health regulations exist and how they work. WHO is working with multiple governments and partners on the response under those regulations. Our priorities are to ensure the affected patients receive care, that the remaining passengers on the ship are kept safe and treated with dignity, and to prevent any further spread of the virus. I asked Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of Spain to accept the ship, which he agreed to do, and I thank Prime Minister Sanchez for his generosity, solidarity, and meeting his moral duty. The ship is now sailing for the Canary Islands, and we're confident in the capacity of Spain to manage this risk, and we're supporting them to do so. Once again, we assess the risk to the people of the Canary Islands as low. WHO has provided guidance to the ship's operator on the management of health on board the vessel. A WHO expert boarded the ship in Cabo Verde and has been joined by 2 doctors from the Netherlands and an expert from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, who will stay on the ship until it reaches the Canary Islands.
That was WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Our guest interview this evening focuses on Senegal as the country achieved a significant increase in the economic benefits of oil exports. This development was announced earlier this week by the National Statistics Agency. But in a challenging economic climate, how can this benefit the population? Suleiman Keita is an economist. He provides analysis in this interview with WADR.
Le Sénégal en mars 2026 a franchi.
Senegal truly crossed the 100,000 barrel per day mark. This is due to external factors. The ongoing war in the Middle East and North Africa has put considerable pressure on certain oil-producing countries to increase their production volumes in order to compensate for the losses they will incur. However, it's also worth noting that this increase is a result of the innovations, particularly logistical ones, that the Senegalese government has implemented to boost its production. The combination of all these factors explains the rise in Senegal's production during this period.
La production du Sénégal donc pendant cette période-là.
The Senegalese National Statistics Agency reports that the economic impact of oil exports increased to 142 billion CFA francs in March and 227 billion CFA francs in April. Can such a sustained increase mitigate the economic shocks predicted by the authorities, as well as those stemming from the crisis in the Middle East?
This increase in production volume has both short-term and long-term effects. In the short term, I mean that it allows the Senegalese government at least to have what we call a financial cushion, because it will sell its production, which will allow it to meet its import needs. Because when we import, Senegal needs foreign currency. So this means that this situation will allow it to effectively offset its production volume. That's the first aspect. At the same time, that is a factor we mustn't forget. Senegal is also an importer of refined petroleum products, because currently the Senegalese government's production capacity doesn't allow it to refine its own oil. So what does that mean? It means that Senegal imports refined petroleum products despite being a producing country. And also in long term, this situation can indeed lead to what we call an additional cost, because it is forced to import the barrel, in fact, of oil to meet its local consumption demand. And this importation now can have long-term consequences right on the state of Senegal.
Given the high cost of living in Senegal, can these funds provide any relief?
Yes, in the short term, this really allows the Senegalese state to access a very significant financial cushion. Everything now depends on how this financial cushion is used. The state must make a strategic choice regarding the use of oil resources and invest them in promising sectors for development. It allows the state to have a financial cushion and effectively lower what we call the budget deficit. So if this financial windfall is used wisely, it's good news for the Senegalese economy.
How can these initial benefits from oil exports, which are steadily increasing, also provide concrete relief to the average citizen's economic situation?
You know, when the state has resources, it increases its production capacity. Now, if the state doesn't have resources, it's forced to go into debt. When the state goes into debt, it puts a strain on the state revenue. Why? Because the state is forced to pay its debt, to draw on taxes. Right now, this situation provides a financial windfall for the state. The state will rely less on businesses for tax payments to cover its operating expenses, will allow them to stimulate economic growth, create jobs, and ultimately improve well-being of the population.
That was Suleiman Keita, an economist. In the world of sports, the 17th edition of the African Swimming Championship is underway in Oran from May 5th to 10th, 2026, bringing together nearly 400 swimmers from across 40 countries. The competition also serves as a qualifying event for the World Aquatics Championship later this year in Beijing. And in football, several names for the African Player of the Year have started emerging. First, the Sadio Mane following the 2025 Africa Cup of Nations, and the other name is Brahim Diaz. And with that, we have come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Ismaila Kamara and Maudo Ju for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, Instagram, and Facebook at WADR English. Coming up is It's You Speaking. I am Veronique Jai. Good evening.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Baft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.